in the scorching sands of ancient Egypt, where the sun blazed mercilessly across endless desert horizons, a civilization emerged that would worship the very force that both sustained and challenged their existence. The story of Ra, the mighty sun god of Egypt, begins in the mists of prehistory, when early Egyptian communities along the Nile first gazed upward at the golden orb that brought life to their world. These ancient peoples, struggling to understand the cosmic forces that governed their daily existence, saw in the sun not merely a celestial body, but a divine presence of immense power and benevolence. The formal worship of Ra crystallized during Egypt's Old Kingdom period, roughly between 2686 and 2181 BCE, when the unified Egyptian state was establishing its religious and political foundations. During this transformative era, the city of Heliopolis, known to the ancient Egyptians as Yunu, or City of Pillars, emerged as the primary center of solar worship. Located in what is now a suburb of modern Cairo, Heliopolis became the beating heart of Ra's cult, where massive temple complexes rose to honor the sun god, and where generations of priests developed the sophisticated theological framework that would define Egyptian solar religion for millennia to come. The priests of Heliopolis were not merely religious functionaries, but intellectual architects who crafted elaborate cosmological systems explaining Ra's supreme position in the Egyptian pantheon. They established Ra as the king of the gods, the creator of all existence, and the divine force responsible for maintaining cosmic order, known as Ma'at. These theological innovations were revolutionary for their time, presenting a unified vision of divine authority that would profoundly influence Egyptian religion, politics, and culture for over 3,000 years. Archaeological evidence suggests that solar worship in Egypt predates the formal establishment of Ra's cult by centuries, if not millennia. Early dynastic rulers incorporated solar symbolism into their regalia and monuments, recognizing the sun's fundamental importance to agricultural cycles and daily life. The famous Narmer palette, dating to around 3100 BCE, already displays solar imagery that would later become associated with Ra's iconography. These early manifestations demonstrate that the reverence for solar deities was deeply embedded in Egyptian consciousness, long before Ra emerged as the dominant solar god. The development of Ra's worship was intimately connected to the political unification of Egypt under the pharaohs. As the early dynasties consolidated power and established the concept of divine kingship, Ra provided the perfect theological foundation for royal authority. The pharaohs claimed to be the earthly sons of Ra, deriving their legitimacy to rule from their divine solar parentage. This connection between solar worship and political power created a symbiotic relationship that strengthened both the monarchy and Ra's religious prominence throughout Egyptian history. The priests of Heliopolis developed increasingly sophisticated rituals and ceremonies to honor Ra, establishing daily practices that mirrored the sun's journey across the sky. These rituals were not merely symbolic gestures, but were believed to be essential for maintaining cosmic order and ensuring Ra's continued protection of Egypt. The morning ceremonies welcomed Ra's emergence from the underworld, midday rituals celebrated his triumph over darkness, and evening observances prepared for his dangerous journey through the realm of the dead. Ra's early iconography drew from both human and animal symbolism, reflecting the complex nature of Egyptian religious thought. He was typically depicted as a man with the head of a falcon, crowned with a solar disk encircled by a serpent, representing both his solar nature and his power over chaos. This distinctive imagery became one of the most recognizable symbols in ancient Egyptian art, appearing on everything from monumental temple walls to humble household objects, demonstrating the pervasive influence of Ra's worship throughout Egyptian society. The theological framework developed at Heliopolis positioned Ra not merely as one god among many, but as the supreme deity from whom all other gods derived their power and authority. This henotheistic approach, where one god is elevated above others without denying their existence, became a defining characteristic of Egyptian religion. Ra was understood to be the source of divine energy that flowed through the entire pantheon, making him the ultimate authority in both the divine and earthly realms. The economic and social impact of Ra's worship was enormous. As the temples dedicated to the sun, God became major centers of wealth, learning, and political influence. The Temple of Ra at Heliopolis controlled vast estates, employed thousands of priests, scribes, and workers, and accumulated immense treasures through royal donations and popular offerings. These religious institutions became powerful economic engines that contributed significantly to Egypt's prosperity and cultural development. The spread of Ra's worship beyond Heliopolis occurred gradually but inexorably as Egyptian civilization expanded and evolved. Local solar deities throughout Egypt were increasingly identified with Ra or absorbed into his cult, creating a unified solar theology that transcended regional boundaries. This religious consolidation paralleled the political unification of Egypt, reinforcing the connection between solar worship and national identity that would characterize Egyptian civilization for thousands of years. The early worship of Ra established patterns and precedents that would influence Egyptian religion throughout its long history. The daily solar rituals, the theological emphasis on cosmic order, the connection between divine and royal authority, and the sophisticated mythological narratives developed during this formative period provided the foundation upon which later generations would build increasingly elaborate religious systems. The sun god who emerged from the temples of Heliopolis during the Old Kingdom would eventually become one of history's most enduring and influential deities, his worship spreading far beyond Egypt's borders, and his mythology inspiring countless generations of believers, scholars, and artists throughout the ancient world. Before time began, before the first dawn broke across the primordial darkness, there existed only Nun, the infinite expanse of chaotic waters that stretched endlessly in all directions. This was not water as mortals understand it, but a primeval substance that contained within itself all the potential for existence, yet remained formless and void. In this boundless ocean of nothingness, where neither light nor darkness had meaning, where up and down were indistinguishable concepts, the seeds of creation lay dormant, waiting for the divine spark that would transform chaos into order, emptiness into abundance, and silence into the eternal song of existence. From these primordial waters, through an act of supreme will and divine consciousness, Ra emerged as the first being, the Atatum, the complete one who contained within himself all the elements necessary for creation. The priests of Heliopolis taught that Ra's emergence was not a birth in any conventional sense, but rather a self-creation, an act of pure divine will that brought consciousness and purpose into the void. He rose from Nun as a shining mound, the first solid matter in a universe of liquid chaos, establishing the primordial hill that would become the template for all sacred architecture in Egypt, from the pyramids to the most humble shrine. Standing alone upon this first land, Ra faced the monumental task of populating the universe with divine beings who would help him maintain order and govern the cosmos. The creation myth describes how Ra, in his solitude, began the process of generation through the most intimate and personal of acts. According to the sacred texts preserved in the pyramid chambers and temple walls, Ra created the first divine couple through his own bodily fluids, an act that symbolized both the necessity of divine sacrifice in creation and the deeply personal investment of the creator in his creation. The god Shu, representing the vital force of air and the breath of life, emerged from Ra's saliva, while the goddess Tefnut, embodying moisture and the life-giving properties of water, came forth from his tears, or in some versions, from other bodily secretions. This creation through bodily fluids was not considered crude or inappropriate by the ancient Egyptians. but rather represented the most profound form of divine generosity, as Ra literally gave of his own substance to bring forth life. The act demonstrated that creation required sacrifice, that the divine must diminish itself to allow for the existence of others. Shu and Tefnut, as the first divine couple, represented the fundamental forces necessary for life to flourish. Shu, as air, provided the breath that would animate all living beings, while Tefnut, as moisture, supplied the water that would nourish and sustain them. Together, they embodied the delicate balance between dryness and wetness, between the life-giving and life-threatening aspects of the natural world that Egyptians knew so well from their desert environment. Their union was not merely romantic, but cosmic, representing the fundamental principle that creation requires the interaction of complementary forces. The mythology continues with Shu and Tefnut, venturing forth into the darkness of Nun, exploring the vast emptiness that surrounded Ra's primordial mound. During their absence, Ra, consumed with worry for his children, sent forth his eye to search for them in the chaotic waters. This divine eye, which would later become one of the most powerful symbols in Egyptian religion, possessed its own consciousness and will, capable of independent action while remaining an extension of Ra's divine power. The eye's mission into the darkness represented the first act of divine love and parental concern in the universe. When the eye returned with Shu and Tefnut, Ra wept tears of joy at their safe return, and from these tears of divine happiness, the first human beings were born. This origin story established humanity's special relationship with Ra, as humans were literally born from the sun god's emotions, making them uniquely connected to divine consciousness while remaining fundamentally different from the gods themselves. The tears that created humanity were tears of love and relief, suggesting that humans were born from Ra's capacity for deep feeling and emotional connection. Shu and Tefnut, reunited with their father, continued the work of creation by producing the next generation of deities. Tefnut gave birth to Geb, the earth god, while Shu fathered Nut, the sky goddess. However, these siblings fell deeply in love and embraced so tightly that there was no space between earth and sky for life to flourish. Ra commanded Shu to separate his children, and the air god positioned himself between Geb and Nut, holding the sky goddess aloft while keeping the earth god below, creating the space necessary for creation to continue. This separation of earth and sky established the basic structure of the Egyptian cosmos, with Geb lying prone as the earth Nut arched overhead as the star-spangled sky, and Shu standing between them as the atmosphere that allowed life to breathe. The image of this divine family became one of the most common motifs in Egyptian art, appearing in tomb paintings, temple decorations, and religious papyri throughout Egyptian history. The separation was both necessary and tragic, representing the sacrifice required to maintain cosmic order. Geb and Nut, despite their separation, managed to produce 5 children who would become some of the most important deities in the Egyptian pantheon: Osiris, Isis, Seth, Nephthys, and in some versions, Horus the Elder. These gods represented the next stage of creation, moving from the cosmic forces embodied by their grandparents to the more anthropomorphic deities who would directly interact with humanity and govern specific aspects of earthly existence. The Heliopolitan creation myth established Ra not merely as one god among many, but as the ultimate source of all divine power and the grandfather of the gods who would shape human destiny. Every deity in the Egyptian pantheon could trace their lineage back to Ra's initial act of self-creation, making him the fountainhead of all divine authority. This genealogical framework provided the theological foundation for Ra's supreme position in Egyptian religion, and justified the complex hierarchies that characterized both divine and earthly power structures throughout Egyptian civilization. The divine lineage that flowed from Ra's primordial act of creation formed the most complex and influential family tree in ancient Egyptian mythology, establishing relationships and hierarchies that would govern both divine and earthly affairs for thousands of years. This celestial genealogy, known as the Ennead of Heliopolis, represented far more than a simple family structure. It embodied the fundamental forces of nature, the principles of cosmic order, and the divine blueprint upon which all Egyptian religious and political systems would be built. Each generation of gods represented an evolution from the abstract cosmic forces of creation toward the more anthropomorphic deities who would directly interact with humanity and shape the destiny of the Egyptian people. At the apex of this divine family stood Ra himself, the self-created god who emerged from the primordial waters of Nun through sheer force of will and divine consciousness. As the ultimate ancestor, Ra possessed the unique distinction of being both father and grandfather to the gods, having created the first generation through his own bodily substances, while serving as the divine patriarch whose authority flowed through every subsequent generation. His position as the original creator made him the source of all divine power, the wellspring from which every god and goddess derived their authority and abilities. The first generation of Ra's divine offspring consisted of the twin deities, Shu and Tefnut, who represented the fundamental elements necessary for life to exist in the space between earth and sky. Shu, the god of air and atmosphere, embodied the breath of life that animated all living beings, while also serving as the divine force that separated earth from sky, creating the space necessary for creation to flourish. His role as the separator and supporter made him essential to the maintenance of cosmic order, as without his constant vigilance, the universe would collapse back into primordial chaos. Tefnut, Shu's twin sister and consort, personified moisture in all its forms, from the life-giving waters of the Nile to the morning dew that refreshed the desert. Her domain extended beyond simple water to encompass the principle of wetness that balanced the dryness of the Egyptian climate, making her essential to agricultural fertility and human survival. Together, Shu and Tefnut represented the delicate environmental balance that characterized Egyptian civilization, where the interplay between air and moisture determined the difference between abundance and famine, life and death. The union of Shu and Tefnut produced the second generation of Ra's divine family, consisting of Geb, the earth god, and Nut, the sky goddess. Geb embodied the fertile soil of Egypt, the solid foundation upon which all life depended, and the source of the precious metals and stones that adorned temples and tombs. His body was understood to be the physical earth itself, with his laughter causing earthquakes and his movements creating the geological features that shaped the landscape. As the earth god, Geb possessed dominion over agriculture, mining, and all the resources that emerged from beneath the ground. Nut, the sky goddess, arched her star-spangled body over the earth, creating the celestial dome that protected and enclosed the world. Her body was adorned with stars that served as a map for both earthly navigation and spiritual journey, while her daily swallowing and rebirth of the sun represented the eternal cycle of death and renewal that governed all existence. The relationship between Geb and Nut was both passionate and tragic, as their love was so intense that Shu was forced to separate them permanently, creating the space between earth and sky that allowed life to flourish while condemning the divine couple to eternal separation. The third generation of Ra's family tree consisted of the 5 children born to Geb and Nut, despite their forced separation. These deities would become the most anthropomorphic and directly involved in human affairs, representing the transition from cosmic forces to personal gods who could be approached through prayer, ritual, and devotion. Osiris, the eldest, became the god of the underworld and the afterlife, embodying the promise of resurrection and eternal life that would become central to Egyptian religious belief. His role as judge of the dead and ruler of the afterlife made him one of the most beloved and widely worshipped deities in the Egyptian pantheon. Isis, the sister and wife of Osiris, emerged as the archetypal mother goddess, embodying the principles of magic, healing, and protective love that made her the patron deity of mothers, wives, and children throughout Egypt. Her mastery of magic and her devotion to her family made her the model for human relationships and the divine protector who could be called upon in times of crisis or need. The mythology surrounding Isis and her resurrection of Osiris would become one of the most influential religious narratives in the ancient world. Seth, the god of chaos, storms, and the desert, represented the necessary but dangerous forces that threatened order and stability. As the brother who murdered Osiris out of jealousy and ambition, Seth embodied the destructive aspects of nature and human psychology that had to be acknowledged and controlled rather than eliminated. His role as the eternal antagonist provided the dramatic tension that drove many of the most important Egyptian myths, while representing the reality that chaos and order existed in constant tension. Nephthys, the sister of Isis and wife of Seth, served as the goddess of mourning, death, and the liminal spaces between life and death. Her role as the protector of the dead and the guide for souls transitioning to the afterlife made her an essential figure in Egyptian funerary religion, while her complex relationships with her siblings reflected the intricate family dynamics that characterized divine society. The final member of this divine generation was Horus the Elder, who in some versions of the mythology was born to Geb and Nut alongside his siblings, while in other traditions emerged from different circumstances. This Horus represented the sky and kingship, establishing the divine prototype for pharaonic authority that would legitimize royal power throughout Egyptian history. The relationships within Ra's divine family were characterized by the same complexities, conflicts, and emotional dynamics that marked human families, but magnified to cosmic proportions. The love between Geb and Nut, the rivalry between Osiris and Seth, the devotion between Isis and Osiris, and the protective relationships between parents and children provided templates for understanding human relationships while demonstrating that even the gods struggled with the challenges of family life. This divine genealogy served multiple functions within Egyptian society, providing not only religious instruction, but also political legitimacy, social organization, and psychological insight into the human condition. The pharaohs claimed descent from this divine family, particularly through their identification with Horus, while ordinary Egyptians found in these divine relationships models for their own family structures and guidance for navigating the complexities of human emotion and social obligation. Each dawn brought with it one of the most magnificent spectacles in Egyptian cosmology, as Ra began his eternal voyage across the heavens in his magnificent solar barque, a divine vessel that carried not merely the physical sun, but the very essence of life order and divine authority across the sky. This daily journey was far more than a simple astronomical phenomenon to the ancient Egyptians. It represented the fundamental rhythm of existence, the cosmic heartbeat that sustained all life, and the divine drama upon which the fate of both gods and mortals depended. The solar barque itself was a marvel of divine craftsmanship, constructed from materials that existed beyond the physical realm, imbued with magical properties that allowed it to traverse the celestial waters while carrying the immense power and responsibility of the sun god. The vessel that carried Ra across the heavens was known by several names throughout Egyptian history, most commonly called the Manjet during its daytime journey, and the Mub-Mesektet during its nighttime passage through the underworld. These were not merely different names for the same boat, but represented the transformation that occurred as Ra's barque adapted to the different realms through which it traveled. The daytime vessel blazed with golden light, its hull crafted from celestial metals that reflected and amplified Ra's solar radiance, while its sails caught the cosmic winds that propelled it across the sky dome that arched over the earth. The crew that accompanied Ra on his daily voyage represented a carefully selected assembly of divine beings, each chosen for their specific abilities and their unwavering loyalty to the sun god. At the prow of the vessel stood the god Khnum, the divine potter who shaped human beings on his celestial wheel, serving as the navigator who guided the barque along its precise celestial course. His presence ensured that Ra's journey would follow the exact path necessary to bring light and life to all corners of the earth, while his creative powers helped maintain the cosmic order that depended upon the sun's regular appearance. Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom and writing, served as Ra's scribe and counselor, recording the events of each day's journey and providing the divine wisdom necessary to navigate the complex challenges that arose during the voyage. His role extended beyond simple record-keeping to include the calculation of time itself, as Thoth's observations during the solar journey established the calendar systems that governed both divine and human activities. The god's presence on the barque ensured that Ra's journey remained aligned with the cosmic principles of Ma'at, the divine order that maintained universal harmony. The goddess Ma'at herself often accompanied Ra on his journey, her ostrich feather serving as both a symbol of truth and justice, and a practical tool for measuring the cosmic winds that propelled the solar vessel. Her presence aboard the barque represented Ra's commitment to maintaining universal order, and his role as the ultimate judge of divine and mortal behavior. The feather of Ma'at would later play a crucial role in the judgment of the dead, but during the solar journey, it served as a constant reminder of the moral responsibilities that accompanied divine power. The daily voyage began each morning at dawn, when Ra's barque emerged from the eastern horizon like a golden ship sailing forth from a harbor of light. This moment of emergence was celebrated throughout Egypt with morning rituals and prayers, as priests and ordinary citizens alike welcomed the return of their divine protector from his dangerous journey through the underworld. The eastern horizon was understood to be a gateway between the realm of the dead and the world of the living, making Ra's daily emergence a victory over death itself and a promise of renewal for all who witnessed his return. As the solar barque sailed across the morning sky, Ra appeared in his aspect as Khepri, the scarab-headed god who represented the rising sun and the principle of becoming. The scarab beetle, which the Egyptians observed rolling balls of dung across the ground, became a powerful symbol for Ra's ability to push the sun across the sky, while simultaneously representing the cycle of death and rebirth that characterized all existence. During these morning hours, Ra's light was gentle and life-giving, awakening the earth from its nightly slumber and calling forth the activities of daily life. The midday portion of Ra's journey represented the peak of his power and authority, when the solar barque reached the highest point of its celestial arc, and Ra appeared in his most magnificent form as Ra-Horakhty, the falcon-headed god, whose blazing eye illuminated every corner of the earth. At this moment of supreme power, no shadows could hide from Ra's penetrating gaze, no secrets could remain concealed from his divine wisdom, and no enemies could challenge his authority. The noon sun was both a blessing and a trial, providing the energy necessary for life while testing the endurance of all living beings with its intense heat. As afternoon progressed toward evening, Ra began his transformation into Atum, the setting sun, whose reddening light signaled the approach of his most dangerous trial. The western horizon beckoned like the mouth of a great serpent, ready to swallow the solar barque and plunge the world into darkness. This daily death of the sun was not merely symbolic, but represented a real cosmic crisis, as Ra's disappearance left the world vulnerable to the forces of chaos that constantly threatened to overwhelm the ordered universe that the sun god had created and sustained. The crew of the solar barque worked with increasing urgency as evening approached, preparing for the transformation that would allow their vessel to navigate the treacherous waters of the underworld. The golden hull that had blazed with light during the day began to dim and change, taking on the darker hues necessary for survival in the realm of the dead. The sails that had caught the winds of the upper air were furled and replaced with different rigging designed for the strange currents that flowed through the underworld rivers. The moment of sunset marked not an ending but a transformation, as Ra's barque plunged through the western gateway into the Duat, the mysterious realm of the dead that lay beneath the earth. This transition was fraught with danger, as the forces of chaos that had been held at bay during the day now gathered their strength for their nightly assault on the cosmic order. The solar barque that had sailed triumphantly across the bright sky now became a vessel of hope, struggling through an ocean of darkness, carrying within it the promise that light would return with the dawn. The daily journey of Ra's solar barque provided the ancient Egyptians with a powerful metaphor for understanding the cycles of life, death, and rebirth that governed both individual existence and cosmic order. The regularity of the sun's appearance and disappearance offered reassurance that despite the daily crisis of sunset and the nightly battle against chaos, the forces of order and light would ultimately prevail, ensuring the continuation of life and the maintenance of divine justice throughout the universe. As the solar barque plunged through the western horizon into the mysterious realm of the Duat, Ra began the most perilous portion of his eternal journey, navigating through 12 hours of absolute darkness where the very foundations of cosmic order faced their greatest test. The underworld was not merely an absence of light, but a realm of active opposition to everything. Ra represented a place where chaos reigned supreme and where the forces of destruction gathered their strength for their nightly assault on creation itself. This subterranean voyage through the land of the dead was simultaneously a journey of death and renewal, as Ra himself underwent a form of death each night, only to be reborn with the dawn, demonstrating the eternal cycle that governed all existence. The entrance to the Duat was guarded by massive gates that required specific passwords and magical formulas to open knowledge that was carefully preserved in the sacred texts and tomb inscriptions that guided both gods and mortals through the treacherous passages of the afterlife. These gates were not merely physical barriers, but represented the fundamental boundary between the world of the living and the realm of the dead. A threshold that could only be crossed by those who possessed the proper divine authority or magical protection. Ra's passage through these gates each night established his supreme authority over both life and death, demonstrating that even the most fearsome barriers of the underworld could not impede the journey of the sun god. The first hour of Ra's underworld journey took him through regions populated by the blessed dead, those righteous souls who had successfully passed the judgment of Osiris and earned their place in the afterlife. These spirits gathered along the banks of the underworld river to witness Ra's passage, their presence serving as both welcome and protection for the sun god as he began his dangerous voyage. Their hymns of praise and adoration provided spiritual sustenance for Ra's crew, while their collective righteousness helped to strengthen the divine barque against the trials that lay ahead in the deeper regions of the Duat. As Ra's vessel penetrated deeper into the underworld, the challenges became increasingly severe and the opposition more determined. The second and third hours brought encounters with various demons and hostile spirits who sought to impede the solar barque's progress through trickery, violence, or magical assault. These creatures of chaos represented the antithesis of everything Ra stood for, embodying disorder, destruction, and the eternal desire to return the universe to the primordial chaos from which it had emerged. The battles fought during these hours were not merely physical confrontations, but cosmic struggles between the fundamental principles of order and chaos. The 4th through 6th hours of the journey took Ra through the most desolate regions of the underworld, where even the blessed dead could not venture, and where the very landscape seemed hostile to the presence of divine light. Here, the solar barque encountered lakes of fire, mountains of darkness, and rivers that flowed backward, defying the natural order that Ra had established in the world above. the crew of the divine vessel had to employ all their magical knowledge and divine power to navigate these treacherous waters, while Ra himself drew upon his deepest reserves of creative energy to maintain the integrity of his solar essence in the face of overwhelming opposition. The seventh hour marked the beginning of the most critical phase of Ra's underworld journey. As the solar barque approached the domain of Apophis, the great serpent of chaos who represented the ultimate threat to cosmic order. This monstrous creature, whose coils could encircle the entire world, lay in wait in the deepest part of the Duat, gathering the forces of destruction for the climactic battle that would determine whether light would return to the world with the dawn. The approach to Apophis's domain was marked by increasing signs of cosmic disturbance, as the very fabric of reality began to fray under the influence of the Chaos Serpent's malevolent presence. The 8th and 9th hours brought Ra face to face with Apophis in a battle that raged across multiple dimensions of existence, involving not only physical combat, but magical warfare, psychological manipulation, and contests of pure will. This nightly confrontation was never merely a repetition of previous battles, but represented a genuine cosmic crisis as Apophis constantly evolved new strategies and gathered new allies in his eternal quest to devour the sun and plunge the universe into permanent darkness. The outcome of this battle was never predetermined, requiring Ra to demonstrate anew each night his worthiness to serve as the guardian of cosmic order. During the 10th and 11th hours, as Ra emerged victorious from his battle with Apophis, the solar barque began its gradual ascent toward the eastern horizon, passing through regions where the influence of chaos gradually diminished and the promise of dawn began to manifest. These hours were marked by the gradual transformation of Ra's solar essence from its nighttime form back toward its daytime radiance, a process that required careful magical preparation and the coordinated efforts of his entire divine crew. The underworld itself began to respond to Ra's approaching victory as the hostile landscape gradually gave way to more welcoming terrain. The 12th and final hour of the underworld journey brought Ra to the eastern gate of the Duat, where the solar barque underwent its final transformation in preparation for its emergence into the world of the living. This moment of transition was perhaps the most delicate of the entire journey, as Ra had to shed his underworld form and resume his role as the life-giving sun, while simultaneously ensuring that none of the chaos he had encountered during his passage could follow him into the world above. The Eastern Gate served as both an exit and a filter, allowing only the purified essence of solar divinity to pass through while blocking the forces of destruction that constantly sought to escape from their underworld prison. The successful completion of Ram's nightly journey through the Duat was celebrated throughout Egypt as the triumph of order over chaos, light over darkness, and life over death. The daily repetition of this cosmic drama provided the ancient Egyptians with profound reassurance that despite the very real threats posed by the forces of destruction, the fundamental order of the universe remained secure under Ra's protection. The underworld passage also served as a model for the journey that every human soul would undertake after death, demonstrating that with proper preparation, magical knowledge, and divine protection, even mortal beings could successfully navigate the dangers of the afterlife and achieve eternal life in the presence of the gods. The mythological significance of Ra's underworld journey extended far beyond its role as an explanation for the daily cycle of day and night, serving as a fundamental metaphor for the process of death and rebirth that governed all aspects of Egyptian religious thought. The sun god's willingness to undergo this dangerous passage each night demonstrated the principle that true divine authority required the acceptance of risk and sacrifice, while his consistent victory over the forces of chaos provided the theological foundation for Egyptian confidence in the ultimate triumph of good over evil, order over disorder, and meaning over meaninglessness. In the deepest, most treacherous depths of the Duat, where darkness reigned absolute and the very concept of order seemed like a distant memory. There dwelt the most terrifying enemy that Ra would ever face in his eternal journey across the heavens and through the underworld. Apophis, known also as Apep, was not merely another demon or hostile spirit that populated the realm of the dead, but rather the living embodiment of primordial chaos itself, a monstrous serpent of such immense size and malevolent power that his very existence threatened to unravel the carefully ordered universe that Ra had created from the waters of Nun. This cosmic adversary represented everything that stood in opposition to the principles of Ma'at, embodying the eternal desire to return all existence to the formless void from which it had emerged. The origins of Apophis were as ancient and mysterious as creation itself, with some traditions suggesting that the Chaos Serpent had emerged from the same primordial waters that had given birth to Ra, making their conflict not merely a battle between good and evil, but a fundamental struggle between two opposing principles that had existed since the dawn of time. Unlike the other gods who had been created through Ra's divine will and creative power, Apophis appeared to be self-existing, a force of pure negation that required no creator and acknowledged no authority save its own insatiable hunger for destruction. This independence made the serpent particularly dangerous, as it could not be controlled, reasoned with, or appeased through any conventional means. The physical description of Apophis varied throughout Egyptian religious texts, but all accounts agreed that the serpent was of truly cosmic proportions, with some sources claiming that its coils could encircle the entire world, while others suggested that its length was literally infinite, stretching across dimensions that mortal minds could not comprehend. The serpent's scales were said to be harder than the finest bronze, impervious to conventional weapons, and capable of deflecting even the most powerful magical attacks. Its eyes blazed with a cold fire that could freeze the soul of any being who gazed directly into them, while its breath carried the essence of absolute nothingness, capable of dissolving matter, energy, and even divine essence itself. The mouth of Apophis was perhaps its most terrifying feature, described as a vast cavern lined with fangs that could pierce the hull of Ra's solar barque and drain the life force from the sun god himself. This maw was not merely a physical threat, but represented the ultimate destination that Apophis envisioned for all creation, a return to the undifferentiated void that had existed before Ra's first act of creation. The serpent's hunger was not for food in any conventional sense, but for the complete annihilation of existence itself, making every encounter with Ra a battle for the very survival of the universe. The nightly confrontation between Ra and Apophis followed patterns that had been established since the beginning of time, yet each battle was unique and genuinely dangerous, as the Chaos Serpent constantly devised new strategies and employed different tactics in its relentless quest to devour the sun. Sometimes Apophis would attempt to block Ra's path through the underworld by coiling its massive body across the river that carried the solar barque, forcing the sun god and his crew to engage in direct physical combat with the monster. Other nights, the serpent would employ more subtle approaches, using its hypnotic gaze to attempt to entrance Ra's crew or employing magical illusions to lead the solar barque astray in the labyrinthine passages of the Duat. The weapons and strategies employed in these cosmic battles were as varied as they were powerful, involving not only physical force, but magical warfare of the highest order. Ra's primary weapon against Apophis was his divine eye, which could unleash beams of pure solar energy, capable of burning through even the serpent's armored scales. The sun god's crew also played crucial roles in these battles, with Thoth providing strategic wisdom, Ma'at ensuring that the conflict remained aligned with cosmic justice, and various other deities contributing their unique powers to the struggle against chaos. The goddess Isis proved particularly effective against Apophis, using her mastery of magic to bind the serpent with invisible chains or to create protective barriers around the solar barque. Her spells were so powerful that they could temporarily paralyze even the mighty Chaos Serpent, giving Ra the opportunity to strike decisive blows against his eternal enemy. The god Set, despite his association with chaos and disorder, also fought alongside Ra against Apophis, recognizing that the complete destruction of order would eliminate his own domain and authority. The outcome of each nightly battle was never predetermined, creating genuine cosmic tension that kept both gods and mortals in suspense, until the moment of Ra's dawn emergence proved that order had once again triumphed over chaos. There were nights when Apophis came perilously close to victory, when the serpent's coils nearly crushed the solar barque, or when its hypnotic powers almost succeeded in entrancing Ra himself. These near defeats were reflected in natural phenomena, such as solar eclipses, which the Egyptians interpreted as moments when Apophis had temporarily succeeded in swallowing the sun, requiring immediate ritual intervention to help Ra escape from the serpent's gullet. The theological implications of the Apophis myth extended far beyond its role as an explanation for the daily cycle of day and night, serving as a fundamental statement about the nature of existence itself. The eternal conflict between Ra and Apophis demonstrated that order and meaning were not natural states, but required constant vigilance and effort to maintain. The universe was not a stable, self-sustaining system, but a delicate balance that could be destroyed if the forces of order ever relaxed their guard or failed in their eternal struggle against chaos. The myth also provided a framework for understanding the presence of evil and suffering in the world, suggesting that these negative forces were not flaws in creation, but inevitable consequences of the ongoing battle between order and chaos. Every act of destruction, every moment of suffering, and every instance of injustice could be understood as manifestations of Apophis's influence, while every act of creation, healing, and justice represented victories for Ra and the forces of order. The ritual implications of the Apophis myth were equally significant, as Egyptian priests developed elaborate ceremonies designed to support Ra in his nightly battle against the Chaos Serpent. These rituals involved the creation of wax models of Apophis that were ritually destroyed, the recitation of powerful spells designed to bind the serpent, and the performance of protective magic intended to strengthen Ra's solar barque for its dangerous journey through the underworld. These ceremonies were not merely symbolic gestures, but were believed to have real cosmic significance, contributing directly to Ra's ability to defeat his eternal enemy and ensure the continuation of ordered existence. The enduring power of the Apophis myth lay in its recognition that the struggle between order and chaos was not a temporary conflict that could be permanently resolved, but an eternal dynamic that defined the very nature of existence, requiring constant vigilance, courage, and commitment from all who valued meaning, purpose, and life itself. The divine nature of Ra was far too vast and complex to be contained within a single form or manifestation, leading the ancient Egyptians to develop an intricate system of solar aspects that reflected the sun god's changing roles, powers, and appearances throughout the daily cycle and across different contexts of worship and mythology. These various forms were not merely different names for the same deity, but represented distinct aspects of Ra's divine essence, each possessing unique characteristics, iconography, and spheres of influence that together created a comprehensive portrait of solar divinity that could address every aspect of human experience and cosmic function. The multiplicity of Ra's forms demonstrated the sophisticated theological understanding of the Egyptian priesthood, who recognized that divine truth was too complex to be captured in any single image or concept. The most fundamental transformation in Ra's daily manifestation occurred as the sun moved across the sky, with each major phase of the solar journey corresponding to a distinct divine aspect that embodied the particular qualities and powers associated with that time of day. This temporal transformation was not merely symbolic, but reflected the Egyptian understanding that divine power itself was dynamic and ever-changing. adapting to meet the different challenges and opportunities presented by each moment of the cosmic cycle. The three primary solar aspects that governed Ra's daily journey represented the eternal cycle of birth, maturity, and death that characterized all existence. Khepri, the scarab-headed god of the morning sun, embodied the principle of becoming and the creative force that brought new life into existence with each dawn. The scarab beetle, which the Egyptians observed rolling balls of dung across the ground before burying them to incubate their eggs, became a powerful symbol for the sun's daily emergence from the underworld and its role in the continuous process of creation and renewal. Khepri's iconography typically depicted him as a man with the head of a scarab beetle, often shown pushing the solar disk across the sky in the same manner that the earthly beetle pushed its precious cargo across the ground. The theological significance of Khepri extended far beyond his role as the morning sun, as this aspect of Ra represented the divine power of transformation and the ability to create new possibilities from existing materials. Just as the scarab beetle transformed waste matter into the foundation for new life, Khepri demonstrated Ra's ability to transform the darkness and chaos of night into the light and order of day. This transformative power made Khepri particularly important in Egyptian funerary religion, where the deceased hoped to undergo their own transformation from death to eternal life under the protection of the morning sun. As the sun reached its zenith at midday, Ra appeared in his most magnificent and powerful form as Ra-Horakhty, literally meaning Ra who is Horus of the horizon. This aspect combined the solar attributes of Ra with the royal and celestial characteristics of Horus, creating a divine manifestation that embodied both the physical power of the noon sun and the political authority of divine kingship. Ra-Horakhty was typically depicted as a falcon-headed man, crowned with the solar disk and Uraeus serpent, representing the perfect fusion of solar and royal symbolism that legitimized pharaonic authority throughout Egyptian history. The noon sun represented the peak of Ra's daily power, when his divine eye could penetrate every shadow and his authority extended over every corner of the earth. During these hours, Ra-Horakhty served as the supreme judge whose blazing gaze could discern truth from falsehood and whose justice was as inevitable as the sun's daily appearance. This aspect of Ra was particularly important in legal and administrative contexts, where oaths were sworn in the name of Ra-Horakhty, and where the sun god's all-seeing eye was invoked to witness contracts, treaties, and other solemn agreements. As evening approached and the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, Ra transformed into Atum, the setting sun whose reddening light signaled the approach of his daily death and journey through the underworld. Atum represented not only the evening sun, but also the principle of completion and the divine power that would eventually bring the current cosmic cycle to its ordained conclusion. This aspect of Ra was often depicted as an elderly man wearing the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt, symbolizing his role as the ultimate authority who would preside over the final judgment of all creation. The theological significance of Atum extended beyond his role as the evening sun to encompass his identity as the original creator god who had emerged from the primordial waters of Nun. In this capacity, Atum represented both the beginning and the end of creation, the Alpha and Omega of divine manifestation, who contained within himself all the potential for existence, while simultaneously embodying the principle that would eventually return all things to their primordial state. This dual nature made Atum a particularly complex and profound aspect of Ra's divine essence. Beyond these three primary solar aspects, Ra manifested in numerous other forms that reflected specific attributes, regional variations, or particular religious contexts. Ra-Khnum combined the solar attributes of Ra with the creative powers of Khnum, the ram-headed god who shaped human beings on his potter's wheel, creating a divine aspect that emphasized Ra's role in the creation and formation of life. This manifestation was particularly popular in Upper Egypt, where Khnum's cult had ancient roots and where the fusion of solar and creative symbolism resonated with local religious traditions. Ra-Sobek represented the fusion of Ra's solar power with the strength and ferocity of Sobek, the crocodile god who ruled over the Nile's waters and the dangerous forces of nature. This aspect emphasized Ra's ability to master and control the chaotic forces that threatened cosmic order, while also highlighting his connection to the life-giving waters of the Nile that sustained Egyptian civilization. The crocodile's association with both danger and protection made Ra-Sobek a particularly powerful protective deity who could defend his worshippers against both physical and spiritual threats. The regional variations in Orai's manifestations reflected the complex process by which local solar deities were gradually absorbed into the expanding cult of Ra, creating a rich tapestry of divine forms that honored both the universal aspects of solar worship and the particular traditions of different Egyptian communities. These local manifestations allowed Ra's worship to adapt to diverse cultural contexts while maintaining the essential theological framework that made him the supreme solar deity. The multiplicity of Ra's forms also served important psychological and spiritual functions, providing worshippers with divine aspects that could address their specific needs, circumstances, and stages of life. Young people might particularly venerate Khepri as the god of new beginnings and fresh possibilities, while mature adults might focus their devotion on Ra-Horakhty as the embodiment of established authority and cosmic justice. Elderly individuals often found special meaning in Atum as the god who understood the wisdom that came with age and the acceptance of life's eventual conclusion. The artistic and literary traditions surrounding Ra's various forms created some of the most sophisticated and beautiful expressions of Egyptian religious art, as artists and scribes sought to capture the unique characteristics and symbolic associations of each divine aspect, while maintaining the underlying unity that connected all manifestations of the sun, God's divine essence. The religious landscape of ancient Egypt was characterized by a remarkable fluidity and adaptability that allowed deities to merge, combine, and transform in response to changing political circumstances, theological developments, and cultural exchanges that occurred over the course of more than 3 millennia of continuous civilization. Ra's supreme position as the sun god made him a natural focal point for this process of divine syncretism, as local deities throughout Egypt were gradually identified with aspects of the solar god or absorbed into his expanding theological framework. This fusion process was not merely a matter of religious convenience or political expediency, but reflected the sophisticated Egyptian understanding that divine truth was multifaceted and that different deities could represent complementary aspects of the same cosmic principles. The most significant and enduring fusion in Egyptian religious history occurred between Ra and Amun, the hidden god of Thebes, who rose to prominence during the Middle Kingdom period when Theban rulers unified Egypt and established their city as the new capital of the realm. Amun, whose name literally meant the Hidden One, represented the invisible creative force that lay behind all manifestation, while Ra embodied the visible solar power that sustained all life. The combination of these two divine principles created Amun-Ra, a composite deity who possessed both the mysterious creative power of Amun and the manifest solar authority of Ra, making him the most complete expression of divine power in the Egyptian pantheon. The theological implications of the Amun-Ra fusion were profound and far-reaching, as this composite deity represented the perfect balance between the hidden and revealed aspects of divine nature. Amun's invisibility complemented Ra's visibility, Amun's creative mystery balanced Ra's manifest power, and Amun's association with air and breath harmonized with Ra's connection to light and heat. This synthesis created a divine figure who could address every aspect of religious experience, from the most abstract theological speculation to the most practical concerns of daily worship and ritual observance. The political dimensions of the Amun-Ra fusion were equally significant, as the Theban pharaohs used this theological development to legitimize their rule and establish their city as the religious center of Egypt. By identifying their local god Amun with the universally recognized Ra, the Theban rulers created a divine patron who possessed both local authenticity and national authority. This religious innovation proved so successful that Amun-Ra remained the supreme deity of Egypt for over 1,000 years, surviving political upheavals, foreign invasions, and religious reforms that toppled other divine figures. The fusion of Ra with Horus represented another crucial development in Egyptian solar theology, creating the composite deity, Ra-Horakhty, who embodied both the cosmic power of the sun and the royal authority of the falcon god. Horus had ancient connections to kingship and the sky, making him a natural partner for Ra in the development of solar royal ideology. The resulting Ra-Horakhty became the divine prototype for pharaonic authority, demonstrating how earthly rulers could embody both solar power and royal legitimacy in their persons and their reigns. This particular fusion was especially important because it resolved potential conflicts between different traditions of divine kingship that had developed in various regions of Egypt. The northern tradition emphasized the solar aspects of royal authority, while the southern tradition focused more heavily on the falcon symbolism associated with Horus. The Ra-Horakhty synthesis allowed both traditions to coexist and reinforce each other, creating a more robust and comprehensive foundation for pharaonic ideology than either tradition could have provided alone. The process of syncretism also affected Ra's relationship with Ptah, the creator god of Memphis, who was particularly associated with craftsmanship, architecture, and the divine word that brought creation into existence. The fusion of Ra and Ptah created theological formulations that emphasized the sun god's role as the divine architect who designed and constructed the ordered universe through the power of creative speech. This synthesis was particularly important in the development of Egyptian creation mythology, as it provided a framework for understanding how divine will was translated into physical reality through the medium of divine craftsmanship. Regional variations in Ra's syncretistic development reflected the complex political and cultural geography of ancient Egypt. The artistic and iconographic traditions that developed around Ra's various syncretistic forms created some of the most complex and sophisticated religious imagery in the ancient world. Artists had to find ways to combine the distinctive visual elements associated with different deities while maintaining the coherent symbolic framework that made these composite figures recognizable and meaningful to worshippers. The resulting artistic traditions influenced religious art throughout the Mediterranean world and beyond. The theological sophistication required to maintain coherent religious systems based on syncretistic deities led to the development of increasingly complex priestly traditions and religious literature that explored the relationships between different divine aspects and their implications for understanding cosmic order and divine nature. These intellectual developments contributed significantly to the broader philosophical and theological traditions that would eventually influence Greek, Roman, and early Christian thought. The success of Ra's syncretistic development demonstrated the fundamental strength and adaptability of Egyptian religious thought, showing how a coherent theological framework could accommodate diverse traditions and experiences while maintaining its essential character and authority. This flexibility allowed Ra's worship to survive and flourish through more than 3 millennia of political, social, and cultural change, making him one of the most enduring and influential deities in human religious history. Among the most powerful and terrifying aspects of Ra's divine nature was his eye, a semi-independent manifestation of the sun, God's wrath and protective fury that could act with devastating autonomy while remaining fundamentally connected to Ra's will and authority. The Eye of Ra was not merely a symbolic representation of the sun, God's vision or awareness, but a distinct divine entity that possessed its own consciousness, motivations, and capacity for both creation and destruction on a cosmic scale. This feminine aspect of Ra's power embodied the fierce protective instincts of divine authority and the terrible consequences that awaited those who challenged the cosmic order that the sun god had established and maintained through his eternal vigilance. The theological concept of the Eye of Ra emerged from the ancient Egyptian understanding that divine power possessed both nurturing and destructive aspects, and that the same force that sustained life and maintained order could, when provoked or threatened, unleash devastation that would restore balance through the elimination of chaotic elements. The eye represented the active, aggressive dimension of Ra's authority, the aspect of solar power that could burn as well as illuminate, destroy as well as create, and punish as well as protect. This duality was essential to Egyptian religious thought, which recognized that true divine authority required the capacity for both mercy and judgment. The most famous manifestation of the Eye of Ra was the goddess Sekhmet, the lioness-headed deity, whose very name meant the powerful one, and whose fierce nature embodied the destructive potential of solar energy when unleashed without restraint. Sekhmet represented the scorching heat of the desert sun, the devastating power of drought and plague, and the terrible fury of divine justice when confronted with rebellion or sacrilege. Her lioness form was particularly appropriate as the lion was recognized throughout the ancient world as the ultimate predator, possessing both the strength to kill large prey and the fierce protective instincts that made lionesses formidable defenders of their cubs. The mythology surrounding Sekhmet's creation and deployment revealed the complex relationship between Ra's protective and destructive impulses, as well as the delicate balance required to maintain cosmic order without destroying the very creation that the sun god sought to protect. According to the most widely preserved version of this myth, Ra became increasingly frustrated with humanity's disobedience and disrespect for divine authority, as mortals began to ignore the laws of Ma'at and engage in behaviors that threatened the stability of the ordered universe. The sun god's anger grew until he could no longer tolerate the situation, leading him to unleash his eye in the form of Sekhmet to punish the rebellious humans. Sekhmet's campaign of destruction was swift and merciless, as the lioness goddess swept across Egypt like a plague of divine fury, slaughtering humans with such efficiency and enthusiasm that she threatened to exterminate the entire human race. Her bloodlust grew with each kill, transforming her from an instrument of divine justice into a force of pure destruction that could not distinguish between the guilty and the innocent. The goddess's rampage continued day and night as she reveled in the taste of human blood and the satisfaction of unleashing her predatory instincts without restraint or limitation. Ra, witnessing the extent of Sekhmet's devastation, began to regret his decision to unleash such overwhelming force against humanity, recognizing that the complete extinction of the human race would serve no constructive purpose and would deprive the universe of the worship and service that mortals provided to the gods. However, the sun god discovered that he could not simply recall his eye or command Sekhmet to cease her destruction, as the lioness goddess had become intoxicated with bloodshed and was no longer responsive to divine authority. This situation created a cosmic crisis that required creative intervention to resolve. The solution to the Sekhmet crisis involved a clever deception that played upon the lioness goddess's bloodthirsty nature, while redirecting her destructive impulses away from humanity. Ra commanded his servants to prepare vast quantities of beer, mixed with red ochre and other substances that would give the liquid the appearance and consistency of human blood. This crimson beer was then spread across the fields, where Sekhmet was expected to continue her hunt, creating what appeared to be massive pools of spilled blood that would attract the goddess's attention and satisfy her thirst for destruction. When Sekhmet discovered these apparent lakes of blood, she immediately began to drink deeply, believing that she was consuming the life essence of her victims and celebrating her successful campaign of vengeance. However, the alcoholic content of the beer gradually began to affect the lioness goddess, dulling her predatory instincts and transforming her rage into intoxication. As Sekhmet continued to drink, her bloodthirsty fury gradually subsided, replaced by the peaceful drowsiness that accompanies excessive alcohol consumption. Eventually, the goddess fell into a deep sleep, allowing her violent nature to subside and her consciousness to return to a more balanced state. When Sekhmet awakened from her alcohol-induced slumber, her personality had undergone a dramatic transformation, as the destructive lioness had become Hathor, the gentle cacao goddess associated with love, music, dance, and maternal protection. This metamorphosis represented the restoration of balance to Ra's eye, as the same divine force that had manifested as devastating destruction now expressed itself as nurturing creativity and protective love. Hathor retained the power and authority of Sekhmet, but channeled these qualities toward constructive rather than destructive ends. The transformation of Sekhmet into Hathor established one of the most important theological principles in Egyptian religion, demonstrating that divine power was fundamentally neutral and that its manifestation as either creative or destructive force depended upon the circumstances that called it forth and the wisdom with which it was directed. The Eye of Ra could serve as either the protector or the destroyer of creation, depending upon the needs of cosmic order and the behavior of those who lived within the divine framework that Ra had established. Other goddesses also served as manifestations of the Eye of Ra, each embodying different aspects of the sun god's protective and punitive authority. Wadjet, the cobra goddess of Lower Egypt, represented the eye's role as the defender of royal authority and the divine protector of the pharaoh. Her position on the royal crown symbolized the constant vigilance of Ra's eye in protecting legitimate authority against all threats, while her venomous bite represented the swift and deadly punishment that awaited those who challenged divine order. Bastet, the cat goddess, embodied a more domesticated but equally vigilant aspect of the Eye of Ra, representing the protective instincts that safeguarded homes, families, and communities from both physical and spiritual threats. Her feline nature combined the fierce hunting instincts of the predator with the nurturing qualities of the mother, making her an ideal guardian for those who sought Ra's protection in their daily lives. The Eye of Ra also played crucial roles in Egyptian funerary religion, where it served as both the judge that evaluated the worthiness of the deceased and the protector that defended righteous souls against the dangers of the afterlife. The eye's ability to see through deception and penetrate all disguises made it an essential component of the judgment process, while its fierce protective nature ensured that those who had lived according to Ma'at would receive divine protection during their journey through the underworld. The relationship between Ra and the pharaohs of Egypt represented one of the most sophisticated and enduring concepts of divine kingship in human history, establishing a theological framework that legitimized royal authority for over 3 millennia, while creating a system of government that was simultaneously earthly and divine, temporal and eternal. This sacred bond between the sun god and Egypt's rulers was not merely symbolic or ceremonial, but constituted the fundamental basis upon which pharaonic authority rested, making every king a living manifestation of Ra's power on earth, and every royal decree an expression of divine will translated into human law and policy. The theological foundation of this relationship rested upon the belief that each pharaoh was literally the son of Ra, born from the union between the sun god and the queen, mother, through a process of divine conception that paralleled but transcended ordinary human reproduction. This divine paternity was not understood as metaphorical or adoptive, but as a biological and spiritual reality that transformed the pharaoh's very essence, making him a being who partook of both human and divine nature while remaining fundamentally different from ordinary mortals. The royal bloodline thus carried within it the actual genetic and spiritual heritage of the sun god, passed down through generations of divinely descended rulers. The process of divine conception was elaborately depicted in temple reliefs and religious texts that described Ra's selection of the future Queen Mother and his assumption of the form of her husband to ensure the birth of a divinely sired heir. These accounts emphasized that the sun god's choice of royal mothers was based upon their spiritual purity, their capacity to bear divine offspring, and their ability to serve as suitable vessels for the transmission of solar divinity to the next generation. The resulting pregnancy was understood to be simultaneously natural and miraculous, producing a child who possessed human form but divine essence. The birth of a pharaoh was celebrated as a cosmic event that renewed the divine covenant between Ra and Egypt, ensuring the continuation of the sacred kingship that maintained cosmic order and protected the land from the forces of chaos that constantly threatened to overwhelm human civilization. The newborn prince was immediately recognized as Ra's earthly representative, destined to assume the throne and continue the eternal struggle between order and disorder that defined the cosmic drama in which Egypt played a central role. The coronation ceremony that transformed a prince into a pharaoh was understood as a divine adoption ritual in which Ra formally acknowledged his earthly son and invested him with the full authority of solar kingship. This ceremony involved elaborate rituals that symbolically recreated the sun god's daily journey across the heavens, with the new pharaoh taking on the role of Ra's earthly counterpart and assuming responsibility for maintaining the cosmic order that the sun god established and sustained through his eternal vigilance. The pharaoh's daily activities were structured to mirror Ra's solar journey, with morning rituals that corresponded to the sun's emergence from the underworld, midday ceremonies that celebrated the peak of solar power, and evening observances that prepared for the dangerous passage through the realm of the dead. These royal rituals were not merely ceremonial obligations, but were believed to be essential for maintaining the cosmic balance that kept Egypt prosperous and secure, making the pharaoh's religious duties as important as his political and military responsibilities. The pharaoh's role as Ra's earthly son extended beyond ritual observance to encompass his function as the supreme judge whose decisions reflected the divine justice that the sun god embodied and enforced throughout the universe. Royal courts were understood to be earthly manifestations of the cosmic tribunal where Ra weighed the actions of gods and mortals, with the pharaoh serving as the sun god's representative in determining guilt and innocence, punishment and reward. This judicial authority was considered absolute and infallible, as the pharaoh's divine nature ensured that his judgments reflected the perfect justice of his solar father. The military aspects of pharaonic authority were also understood in terms of the pharaoh's relationship with Ra, as the king's role as Egypt's supreme commander paralleled the sun god's eternal battle against the forces of chaos that threatened cosmic order. The pharaoh's victories in battle were celebrated as manifestations of Ra's power working through his earthly son, while military defeats were interpreted as signs that the king had somehow failed to maintain proper alignment with his divine father's will and purpose. The pharaoh's responsibility for Egypt's prosperity extended to his role in ensuring the annual flooding of the Nile, the fertility of the land, and the abundance of the harvests that sustained Egyptian civilization. These natural phenomena were understood to be direct consequences of the pharaoh's successful maintenance of his relationship with Ra, as the sun god's favor was believed to manifest itself through the regular operation of the natural cycles that governed agricultural productivity and economic prosperity. The architectural projects undertaken by the pharaohs were designed to honor Ra and demonstrate the king's devotion to his divine father, while creating permanent monuments that would ensure the continuation of the solar cult long after the individual pharaoh's death. The great pyramids, massive temples, and elaborate tomb complexes that characterized Egyptian royal architecture were not merely expressions of royal ego, but were understood as necessary infrastructure for maintaining the cosmic order that depended upon the proper worship and service of the sun god. The pharaoh's death was understood as a return to his divine father, a reunion that transformed the deceased king into a star in Ra's celestial court, while ensuring the smooth transition of divine authority to his successor. The elaborate mummification processes and burial rituals that preserved the pharaoh's body and equipped him for the afterlife were designed to facilitate this divine reunion, while maintaining the continuity of solar kingship that protected Egypt from the chaos that would result from any interruption in the divine succession. The queens and royal family members also participated in this divine relationship, with queens often identified as manifestations of goddesses associated with Ra's cult, and royal children understood to be junior members of the divine family that ruled both heaven and earth. This extended divine kinship created a royal court that was simultaneously a human institution and a divine assembly, with courtiers and officials serving not merely a human king, but the earthly representative of the supreme solar deity. The pharaoh's divine nature required him to maintain ritual purity and observe religious obligations that set him apart from ordinary mortals, while ensuring his continued fitness to serve as Ra's earthly representative. These requirements included daily purification rituals, dietary restrictions, and ceremonial obligations that consumed much of the royal schedule, and required the support of elaborate priestly hierarchies dedicated to maintaining the pharaoh's divine status. The international implications of the pharaoh's divine sonship extended Egypt's religious influence far beyond its borders, as foreign rulers and diplomats were required to acknowledge the pharaoh's divine nature and show appropriate respect for his status as Ra's earthly representative. This divine diplomacy created a form of soft power that enhanced Egypt's international prestige while spreading awareness of Ra's cult throughout the ancient world. The worship of Ra throughout ancient Egypt was centered around magnificent temple complexes that served as earthly palaces for the sun god, elaborate ritual centers where daily ceremonies maintained cosmic order, and economic powerhouses that controlled vast resources and employed thousands of priests, scribes, artisans, and workers dedicated to serving the solar deity. These sacred institutions were far more than simple places of worship. They were complete religious ecosystems that encompassed every aspect of Egyptian spiritual, intellectual, and economic life, while serving as the primary interface between the divine and human realms, where mortals could approach the awesome presence of the sun god through properly conducted rituals and offerings. The greatest of all temples dedicated to Ra was the magnificent complex at Heliopolis, the ancient city of Unu, that served as the primary center of solar worship from the earliest dynasties through the end of pharaonic civilization. This vast religious installation covered hundreds of acres and included multiple temple buildings, sacred lakes, administrative offices, workshops, libraries, schools, and residential quarters for the thousands of people who worked within its walls. The central temple itself was a marvel of ancient architecture, with massive stone columns that reached toward the heavens like frozen prayers, and walls covered with intricate reliefs that depicted every aspect of Ra's mythology and cosmic functions. The most sacred area of the Heliopolis temple was the inner sanctuary, where the cult statue of Ra resided, a magnificent golden figure that was believed to house the actual presence of the sun god during the daily rituals that sustained his earthly manifestation. This statue was not merely an artistic representation, but was understood to be a living vessel through which Ra could interact with his worshippers and receive the offerings and prayers that maintained the cosmic balance between divine and human realms. Access to this inner sanctuary was strictly limited to the highest-ranking priests who had undergone years of purification and training to prepare them for direct contact with solar divinity. The daily ritual cycle that governed temple worship was designed to mirror Ra's journey across the heavens and through the underworld, creating a continuous cycle of ceremonies that began before dawn and continued throughout the day and night. The morning rituals were the most elaborate and important, as they welcomed Ra's emergence from his nightly battle with chaos and celebrated his victory over the forces of darkness that threatened cosmic order. These ceremonies began while the temple was still shrouded in darkness, with priests lighting sacred fires and burning incense to prepare for the sun god's arrival. As the first rays of sunlight touched the temple's eastern walls, the priests would open the doors of the inner sanctuary and approach the cult statue with elaborate offerings of food, drink, clothing, and precious objects that demonstrated human devotion to the sun god while providing the material sustenance that maintained his earthly presence. The statue would be ritually awakened with hymns and prayers, then carefully washed, anointed with sacred oils, dressed in fresh garments, and presented with a feast of the finest foods that Egypt could provide. The midday ceremonies celebrated Ra's triumph at the peak of his daily journey, when his power reached its maximum intensity and his authority extended over every corner of the earth. These rituals emphasized the sun god's role as the supreme judge and cosmic ruler, with priests reciting prayers that acknowledged his absolute authority while seeking his protection and guidance for the pharaoh, the nation, and all who lived under his divine care. The temple's courtyards would be filled with worshippers who came to witness these public ceremonies and participate in the collective celebration of solar divinity. The evening rituals prepared Ra for his dangerous journey through the underworld, with priests performing protective magic and reciting spells designed to strengthen the sun god for his nightly battle against Apophis and the forces of chaos. These ceremonies had a more somber and urgent character than the morning celebrations, as they acknowledged the very real cosmic crisis that occurred each night when the sun disappeared below the horizon and the world was left vulnerable to the powers of darkness and disorder. The temple festivals that punctuated the Egyptian religious calendar provided opportunities for the entire population to participate in the worship of Ra through elaborate public celebrations that could last for days or even weeks. The most important of these was the annual Opet festival, during which the cult statue of Ra would be carried in magnificent processions through the streets of Heliopolis, while thousands of worshippers lined the route to catch a glimpse of their divine protector and receive his blessings for the coming year. The economic functions of Ra's temples were as important as their religious activities, as these institutions controlled vast estates throughout Egypt that provided the agricultural surplus necessary to support the elaborate ritual cycles and maintain the thousands of people who worked within the temple system. The temples owned fields, orchards, vineyards, workshops, and even entire villages whose inhabitants were dedicated to serving the sun god through their labor and productivity. This economic power made the temples major players in Egyptian politics and society, with the high priests of Ra wielding influence that rivaled that of the pharaoh himself. The educational functions of the temples were equally significant, as these institutions served as the primary centers of learning where scribes, priests, doctors, architects, and other professionals received the training necessary to maintain Egyptian civilization. The temple libraries contained vast collections of religious texts, medical treatises, mathematical works, astronomical observations, and historical records that preserved the accumulated knowledge of Egyptian culture while providing the intellectual foundation for continued innovation and development. The workshops attached to Re's temples produced some of the finest art and craftsmanship in the ancient world, as skilled artisans created the statues, reliefs, jewelry furniture, and ceremonial objects that adorned the sacred spaces and equipped the rituals that honored the sun god. These craftsmen were not merely skilled laborers, but were considered sacred artists whose work participated in the divine creative process that maintained cosmic order through the production of beautiful and meaningful objects. The medical facilities associated with the temples provided healthcare for both the temple personnel and the broader population, as the priests of Ra were also trained as physicians who understood the connection between physical health and spiritual well-being. The temple hospitals combined practical medical treatment with religious healing rituals, creating a holistic approach to healthcare that addressed both the physical and spiritual dimensions of illness and recovery. The astronomical observations conducted at Ra's temples contributed significantly to the development of Egyptian calendar systems and mathematical knowledge, as the priests carefully tracked the sun's movements throughout the year and used this information to predict the flooding of the Nile, plan agricultural activities, and schedule religious festivals. These scientific activities were understood as forms of worship that honored Ra through the careful study of his cosmic functions and the practical application of solar knowledge to human needs. The pilgrimage traditions that brought worshippers from throughout Egypt and beyond to visit Ra's temples created networks of religious and cultural exchange that spread Egyptian influence throughout the ancient world, while enriching the local communities that hosted these sacred sites. Pilgrims brought offerings, stories, and traditions from their home regions while taking back religious knowledge, artistic inspiration, and cultural innovations that they had encountered during their temple visits. The ancient Egyptian conception of death and the afterlife was fundamentally shaped by the mythology and cosmic functions of Ra as the sun god's daily journey through the underworld, provided the theological framework for understanding how deceased souls could navigate the dangers of the Duat and achieve eternal life in the presence of the gods. This solar afterlife was not merely a destination for the dead, but represented the ultimate goal of human existence, a state of divine communion that transformed mortal souls into eternal beings who could participate in Ra's cosmic journey while maintaining their individual consciousness and identity throughout the endless cycles of time that stretched beyond the boundaries of earthly existence. The process of death itself was understood as the beginning of a transformative journey that paralleled Ra's nightly passage through the underworld, with the deceased soul facing many of the same challenges and dangers that confronted the sun god during his battle against the forces of chaos and destruction. This parallel was not merely metaphorical, but reflected the Egyptian belief that human souls possessed the potential for divine transformation, provided they had lived according to the principles of Ma'at and had received proper preparation for the trials that awaited them in the realm of the dead. The mummification process that preserved the physical body was designed to ensure that the deceased would possess a suitable vessel for their soul, his eventual reunion with Ra in the solar barque, as the Egyptians believed that eternal life required the maintenance of bodily integrity even after death. The elaborate procedures involved in mummification were understood as sacred rituals that prepared the deceased for their divine transformation, while demonstrating the family's devotion to ensuring their loved ones' successful journey to the afterlife. The tomb itself served as a miniature version of the underworld through which Ra traveled each night, with its chambers, corridors, and decorative programs designed to guide the deceased soul through the various stages of the afterlife journey, while providing the magical protection and spiritual sustenance necessary for survival in the realm of the dead. The walls of Egyptian tombs were covered with scenes from the solar journey, spells from the Book of the Dead, and depictions of the deceased participating in the daily activities of the afterlife that would occupy their eternal existence. The Judgment of the Dead, which determined whether a soul was worthy to join Ra's eternal journey, took place in the Hall of Two Truths under the supervision of Osiris, but with Ra serving as the ultimate authority whose approval was necessary for admission to the solar afterlife. This judgment process involved the weighing of the deceased's heart against the feather of Ma'at, with the results determining whether the soul would be admitted to the blessed afterlife or condemned to destruction by the monstrous Amun, who devoured the hearts of the unworthy. Those souls who successfully passed the judgment were granted the privilege of joining Ra's crew aboard the solar barque, where they would serve various functions in maintaining the cosmic order that the sun god's journey represented. Some became members of the rowing crew that propelled the divine vessel through the celestial waters, while others served as guards who helped defend against the attacks of Apophis and other chaotic forces. The most worthy souls might even be granted positions as advisors or companions to Ra himself, participating directly in the divine decision-making that governed the universe. The daily routine of the blessed dead involved participating in Ra's journey across the sky during the day and through the underworld at night, experiencing the full cycle of cosmic renewal that characterized the sun god's eternal voyage. During the daylight hours, the deceased souls would witness the beauty and order of creation from their privileged position aboard the solar barque, while during the nighttime passage, they would contribute to the ongoing battle against chaos that ensured the continuation of ordered existence. The concept of the solar afterlife provided comfort and motivation for the living, as it promised that death was not an ending, but a transformation that could lead to eternal participation in the most important cosmic drama in the universe. This belief encouraged Egyptians to live according to the principles of Ma'at, while making the necessary preparations for their eventual journey to the afterlife, including the commissioning of proper tomb equipment, the performance of appropriate rituals, and the cultivation of the moral character that would ensure their worthiness for divine communion. The Book of the Dead, which served as a guidebook for navigating the afterlife, was filled with spells and instructions that were specifically designed to help the deceased soul join Ra's journey and avoid the numerous dangers that threatened unwary travelers in the underworld. These texts provided detailed maps of the Duat, passwords for passing through various gates and checkpoints, and magical formulas for overcoming the demons and obstacles that blocked the path to eternal life. The solar afterlife was not conceived as a static paradise, but as an active existence filled with meaningful work and continued spiritual development, as the blessed dead were expected to contribute to the maintenance of cosmic order while growing in wisdom and divine understanding through their eternal association with Ra and his divine crew. This dynamic conception of the afterlife reflected the Egyptian understanding that true fulfillment required purposeful activity and continued growth rather than passive enjoyment of eternal rewards. The democratization of the solar afterlife that occurred during the Middle Kingdom period extended the promise of eternal life beyond the royal family to include all Egyptians who lived righteously and received proper burial preparations, creating a more inclusive vision of the afterlife that reflected the growing influence of solar theology throughout Egyptian society. This development made Ra's afterlife accessible to ordinary citizens while maintaining the special privileges and responsibilities that came with divine communion. The influence of solar afterlife beliefs extended beyond Egypt to affect the religious traditions of neighboring cultures, as the promise of eternal life through association with a solar deity became a common theme throughout the ancient Mediterranean world. The Egyptian conception of the solar journey provided a model that was adapted and modified by various cultures while retaining its essential character as a path to divine transformation and eternal existence. The artistic traditions that developed around the solar afterlife created some of the most beautiful and sophisticated religious art in human history, as Egyptian artists sought to capture the wonder and majesty of the divine realm while providing visual guides that would help the deceased navigate their journey to eternal life. These artistic works served both aesthetic and practical functions, beautifying the tombs while providing the magical images that were believed to facilitate the soul, successful transformation and integration into Ra's cosmic journey. The psychological impact of solar afterlife beliefs provided Egyptians with a framework for understanding death that emphasized continuity rather than termination, transformation rather than destruction, and hope rather than despair, creating a cultural attitude toward mortality that enabled Egyptian civilization to maintain its stability and confidence through more than 3 millennia of historical change and challenge. The worship of Ra, which had dominated Egyptian religious life for over 2 millennia, and had seemed as eternal and unchanging as the sun's daily journey across the heavens, began to face unprecedented challenges during the late period of Egyptian history as foreign invasions, political upheavals, and cultural transformations gradually eroded the foundations upon which solar theology had rested since the earliest dynasties. This decline was not a sudden collapse, but rather a gradual process of adaptation and transformation that reflected the changing realities of Egyptian civilization as it struggled to maintain its identity and independence in the face of increasingly powerful foreign influences and internal pressures that challenged traditional religious and political structures. The Persian conquest of Egypt in 525 BCE marked the beginning of a new era in which native Egyptian religious traditions were forced to coexist with foreign rulers who possessed their own theological frameworks and political agendas that did not necessarily align with the solar kingship ideology that had legitimized pharaonic authority for thousands of years. The Persian kings, while generally tolerant of local religious practices, could not claim divine descent from Ra, in the same way that native pharaohs had done, creating a fundamental disruption in the theological system that had connected solar worship to political authority throughout Egyptian history. The Achaemenid period saw the emergence of new syncretic religious movements that attempted to reconcile Egyptian solar theology with Persian Zoroastrian concepts, creating hybrid theological systems that preserved elements of Ra's worship while adapting to the political realities of foreign rule. These developments demonstrated the continued vitality of Egyptian religious thought, while revealing the flexibility that had always characterized the solar cult, its ability to absorb and integrate new influences without losing its essential character. The conquest of Egypt by Alexander the Great in 332 BCE introduced Hellenistic influences that would profoundly transform the religious landscape of the Nile Valley, as Greek philosophical concepts and religious practices began to interact with traditional Egyptian theology in ways that created entirely new forms of solar worship. The Ptolemaic dynasty that ruled Egypt after Alexander's death actively promoted the fusion of Greek and Egyptian religious traditions, leading to the development of syncretic deities like Serapis, who combined aspects of Ra with Greek solar gods like Apollo and Helios. The Ptolemaic period witnessed a remarkable renaissance of Egyptian religious art and architecture, as the Greek rulers sought to legitimize their authority by presenting themselves as the heirs of the pharaonic tradition, while simultaneously introducing new artistic styles and architectural forms that reflected Hellenistic aesthetic preferences. The great temple complexes built during this period, such as those at Edfu and Dendera, represented the culmination of Egyptian religious architecture, while incorporating Greek and Roman elements that demonstrated the cosmopolitan character of Ptolemaic Egypt. The rise of mystery religions during the Hellenistic period provided new contexts for solar worship, as Ra's mythology was adapted to serve the needs of initiatic cults that promised personal salvation and divine transformation to their members. These mystery traditions emphasize the individual's direct relationship with the solar deity, rather than the collective worship that had characterized traditional Egyptian religion, reflecting broader cultural shifts toward personal spirituality or an individual religious experience. The Roman conquest of Egypt in 30 BCE brought new challenges and opportunities for the worship of Ra, as the solar god's cult was gradually integrated into the broader religious system of the Roman Empire, while maintaining its distinctive Egyptian character. Roman emperors, like their Ptolemaic predecessors, sought to legitimize their rule over Egypt by adopting pharaonic titles and participating in traditional religious ceremonies. But their primary allegiance remained to Roman gods and political institutions, rather than to the solar theology that had once unified Egyptian civilization. the spread of Christianity throughout the Roman Empire posed the most serious challenge that Regi's worship had ever faced, as the new monotheistic religion offered a fundamentally different understanding of divine nature and human destiny that was incompatible with the polytheistic framework within which solar theology had developed. Christian missionaries actively opposed the worship of Ra and other Egyptian gods, denouncing them as demons or false idols that led believers away from the true God revealed in Jesus Christ. Despite Christian opposition, the worship of Ra continued to evolve and adapt, with some solar traditions being absorbed into Christian symbolism and theology, while others persisted in modified forms that could coexist with the new religious environment. The identification of Christ with the Sun of Righteousness and the incorporation of solar imagery into Christian art demonstrated the continued power of solar symbolism, even within a monotheistic religious framework. The closing of the pagan temples by Christian emperors in the 4th and 5th centuries CE marked the official end of Ra's public worship, but private devotion to the solar god continued in various forms throughout the Byzantine period and beyond. Archaeological evidence suggests that some Egyptians continued to practice traditional solar rituals in secret, while others found ways to honor Ra through Christian prayers and ceremonies that preserved essential elements of solar theology within an acceptable religious framework. The Islamic conquest of Egypt in 641 CE brought yet another transformation to the religious landscape of the Nile Valley, as the new Muslim rulers established a monotheistic system that was even more opposed to traditional Egyptian polytheism than Christianity had been. However, Islamic scholars and mystics showed considerable interest in ancient Egyptian wisdom traditions, leading to the preservation of some solar theological concepts within Islamic esoteric literature and philosophical works. The medieval period saw the emergence of Hermetic traditions that claimed to preserve the ancient wisdom of Egypt, including solar theological concepts that were attributed to the legendary Hermes Trismegistus, who was identified with the Egyptian god Thoth. These Hermetic texts, while often containing later additions and modifications, helped to transmit some aspects of Ra's mythology and solar symbolism to European scholars and mystics who were seeking alternatives to conventional Christian theology. The Renaissance rediscovery of ancient Egyptian texts and monuments sparked new interest in Ra and other Egyptian deities. As European scholars began to study hieroglyphic inscriptions and religious papyri that revealed the sophistication and complexity of pharaonic religious thought. This scholarly interest led to the development of Egyptology as a scientific discipline, while inspiring artistic and literary movements that drew upon Egyptian solar symbolism for creative inspiration. The modern period has witnessed a remarkable revival of interest in Ra and ancient Egyptian religion, as archaeological discoveries have revealed the full extent of solar worship, its influence on Egyptian civilization, while contemporary spiritual movements have found new relevance in the solar god's mythology and symbolism. This revival has taken many forms, from scholarly research that seeks to understand ancient Egyptian religion in its historical context, to New Age movements that adapt solar theology for contemporary spiritual practice. The transformation of Ra's worship from an ancient religious system to a subject of modern scholarly and spiritual interest demonstrates the enduring power of solar symbolism and the continued relevance of the theological insights that Egyptian priests and thinkers developed over thousands of years of religious reflection and practice. While the original context of Ra's worship has been lost, the essential truths that the solar god embodied continue to inspire and inform human understanding of the divine, the cosmos, and the eternal quest for meaning and transcendence that characterizes the human spiritual journey. The artistic and literary traditions that developed around Ra throughout the long history of Egyptian civilization created some of the most magnificent and enduring expressions of religious devotion in human culture, transforming the abstract theological concepts associated with solar worship into tangible visual and textual forms that could communicate the majesty, power, and cosmic significance of the sun god to generations of believers while preserving the essential elements of solar mythology for posterity. These artistic traditions were not merely decorative or illustrative, but served crucial religious functions, as the Egyptians believed that properly executed images and texts possessed magical properties that could facilitate communication between the divine and human realms, while ensuring the continuation of cosmic order through the perpetual recreation of sacred narratives and symbols. The earliest artistic representations of Ra appeared during the Old Kingdom period in the form of hieroglyphic symbols and simple relief carvings that established the basic iconographic vocabulary that would characterize solar art throughout Egyptian history. The solar disk, the falcon, the Uraeus serpent, and the human figure with outstretched arms became the fundamental visual elements through which artists could represent different aspects of Ra's divine nature and cosmic functions. These symbols were not arbitrary artistic choices, but were understood to be divinely revealed forms that captured essential truths about the sun god's character and role in maintaining universal order. The development of more sophisticated artistic techniques during the Middle Kingdom period allowed Egyptian artists to create increasingly complex and nuanced representations of Ra that could convey subtle theological concepts and mythological narratives through visual means. The famous solar hymns, carved on tomb walls and temple surfaces during this period, demonstrated how artistic and literary traditions could work together to create comprehensive religious experiences that engaged multiple senses while providing both aesthetic pleasure and spiritual instruction for viewers who encountered these sacred works. The tomb paintings that depicted Ra's doughy journey across the heavens and through the underworld represented some of the most ambitious and successful attempts in ancient art to visualize cosmic processes and divine activities that transcended ordinary human experience. These elaborate compositions required artists to develop innovative techniques for representing time, space, and spiritual transformation, while maintaining the symbolic clarity that made these images effective tools for religious instruction and magical protection. The resulting artworks created visual narratives that could guide the deceased through the afterlife while providing the living with powerful images of divine order and cosmic harmony. The temple reliefs that covered the walls of Egypt's great religious complexes served multiple functions as artistic masterpieces, religious texts, and magical instruments that facilitated the proper performance of ritual activities, while creating sacred spaces that reflected the divine order of the cosmos. The artists who created these reliefs had to master not only the technical skills required for carving stone and applying pigments, but also the theological knowledge necessary to ensure that their work accurately represented the complex relationships between different deities and the proper procedures for approaching the divine presence. The literary traditions associated with Ra encompassed a vast range of textual forms, from simple hymns and prayers that could be recited by ordinary worshippers to elaborate theological treatises that explored the most sophisticated aspects of solar mythology and cosmic theory. The pyramid texts, which represented the earliest known religious literature in human history, contained numerous references to Ra and his cosmic functions, establishing literary precedents that would influence Egyptian religious writing for thousands of years, while preserving ancient traditions that might otherwise have been lost to historical change. The solar hymns that were composed throughout Egyptian history demonstrated the remarkable literary sophistication that Egyptian poets and theologians brought to their celebration of Ra's divine attributes and cosmic activities. These texts employed complex metaphorical language, intricate rhythmic patterns, and sophisticated theological concepts to create literary works that functioned simultaneously as artistic achievements, religious devotions, and magical formulas that could invoke Ra's presence and protection for those who recited them with proper understanding and reverence. The Book of the Dead, which served as the most important guide to the afterlife in Egyptian religious literature, contained numerous spells and instructions related to Ra's underworld journey and the deceased soul's hope of joining the solar barque in its eternal voyage through the cosmos. These texts required their authors to combine practical knowledge about navigating the dangers of the afterlife with poetic language that could capture the wonder and terror of the divine realm, while providing clear instructions that could be followed by souls who were experiencing the disorientation and confusion that accompanied death and spiritual transformation. The artistic evolution of Ra's iconography reflected broader changes in Egyptian religious thought and cultural values, as different periods emphasized different aspects of the sun, God's character and cosmic functions through their distinctive artistic styles and symbolic preferences. The austere and monumental art of the Old Kingdom emphasized Ra's role as the supreme cosmic authority, while the more intimate and emotionally expressive art of the New Kingdom reflected a growing emphasis on personal relationships between individual worshippers and their divine protectors. The international influence of Egyptian solar art extended far beyond the borders of the Nile Valley, as foreign cultures encountered and adapted Egyptian artistic traditions through trade, diplomacy, and cultural exchange. The solar symbolism that appeared in Nubian, Mesopotamian, and Mediterranean art often showed clear Egyptian influences, while demonstrating how different cultures could interpret and modify solar imagery to suit their own religious and aesthetic preferences. The Amarna period represented a revolutionary moment in the artistic representation of solar divinity, as Akhenaten's religious reforms led to the development of entirely new artistic styles and iconographic programs that emphasized the Aten's role as the sole source of divine power, while rejecting many of the traditional symbols and narratives associated with Ra's worship. Although this artistic revolution was relatively short-lived, it demonstrated the continued vitality and adaptability of Egyptian solar art, while providing insights into the relationship between religious innovation and artistic expression. The Ptolemaic and Roman periods witnessed a remarkable synthesis of Egyptian solar art with Hellenistic and Roman artistic traditions, creating hybrid styles that preserved essential elements of pharaonic religious art while incorporating foreign aesthetic preferences and technical innovations. The temple complexes built during these periods, such as those at Edfu and Philae, represented the culmination of Egyptian religious architecture, while demonstrating how traditional solar symbolism could be adapted to serve the needs of cosmopolitan religious communities. The preservation of Egyptian solar art and literature through the medieval and modern periods has required the dedicated efforts of scholars, archaeologists, and conservators who have worked to protect these cultural treasures from the ravages of time weather and human destruction, while making them accessible to contemporary audiences through museums, publications, and digital archives. These preservation efforts have revealed the full scope and sophistication of Egyptian artistic achievement, while providing modern viewers with opportunities to experience the power and beauty of ancient solar art. The influence of Egyptian solar art on modern artistic movements has been profound and continuing, as contemporary artists have found inspiration in the symbolic richness, technical mastery, and spiritual depth of ancient Egyptian religious art, while adapting solar imagery and mythological themes to address contemporary concerns and aesthetic preferences. This ongoing dialogue between ancient and modern artistic traditions demonstrates the enduring relevance of the visual and literary legacy that Egyptian civilization created in honor of Ra, and the cosmic principles that the sun god embodied and protected throughout his eternal journey across the heavens and through the underworld. The enduring legacy of Ra extends far beyond the boundaries of ancient Egypt, permeating the cultural, religious, and intellectual traditions of civilizations across the globe. while continuing to inspire contemporary spiritual movements, artistic expressions, and scholarly investigations that demonstrate the timeless relevance of the insights and symbols that Egyptian civilization developed during its 3,000-year devotion to the sun god. This remarkable persistence of Ra's influence reflects not merely the historical importance of Egyptian culture, but the fundamental human need to understand and connect with the cosmic forces that govern existence, making the sun god's mythology and symbolism as relevant to modern seekers as it was to the ancient priests who first developed the sophisticated theological frameworks that explained Ra's role in creating and maintaining universal order. The transmission of Ra's legacy to later civilizations began during the height of Egyptian power, when diplomatic, commercial, and cultural exchanges spread Egyptian religious concepts throughout the ancient Mediterranean world and beyond. Greek philosophers and mystics encountered Egyptian solar theology through their travels to Egypt and their interactions with Egyptian priests, leading to the incorporation of solar symbolism and mythological themes into Greek religious and philosophical traditions that would eventually influence the development of Western thought. The identification of Ra with Apollo and other Greek solar deities created syncretic religious systems that preserved essential elements of Egyptian solar worship, while adapting them to Greek cultural contexts and philosophical frameworks. The Roman Empire's absorption of Egyptian religious traditions led to the widespread dissemination of solar symbolism throughout the Mediterranean world, as Roman soldiers, merchants, and administrators carried Egyptian religious concepts to the far corners of the empire, while Egyptian priests and devotees established temples and mystery cults in major Roman cities. The cult of Sol Invictus, which became the official religion of the Roman Empire under Emperor Aurelian, drew heavily upon Egyptian solar theology, while incorporating elements from other solar traditions to create a universal solar religion that reflected the cosmopolitan character of Roman civilization. The influence of Egyptian solar symbolism on early Christianity was profound and lasting, despite the official Christian rejection of pagan religious traditions. The identification of Christ with the Son of Righteousness, the incorporation of solar imagery into Christian art and architecture, and the adoption of December 25th as the celebration of Christ's birth all reflected the continued power of solar symbolism within the new monotheistic framework that Christianity provided. The development of Christian monasticism in the Egyptian desert created opportunities for the preservation and transmission of ancient Egyptian spiritual practices that influenced the development of Christian mysticism and contemplative traditions. The Islamic conquest of Egypt led to the preservation of Egyptian scientific and philosophical traditions within Islamic intellectual culture, as Muslim scholars translated and studied ancient Egyptian texts while developing new interpretations of solar symbolism that could coexist with Islamic monotheism. The Hermetic traditions that emerged during the medieval period claimed to preserve the ancient wisdom of Egypt, including solar theological concepts that were attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, and that influenced the development of Islamic esotericism, Jewish Kabbalah, and Christian mysticism throughout the medieval and Renaissance periods. The Renaissance rediscovery of ancient Egyptian culture sparked a renewed interest in Ra and other Egyptian deities that influenced the development of European art, literature, and philosophy, while contributing to the emergence of Egyptology as a scientific discipline. The decipherment of hieroglyphic writing by Jean-François Champollion in 1822 opened new possibilities for understanding ancient Egyptian religious texts and revealed the sophistication and complexity of solar theology that had been preserved in temple inscriptions, papyrus manuscripts, and tomb decorations throughout Egypt. The modern archaeological exploration of Egypt has revealed the full extent of Ra's influence on ancient Egyptian civilization, while providing contemporary audiences with unprecedented access to the artistic and literary treasures that Egyptian culture created in honor of the sun god. The discovery of intact tombs, temple complexes, and religious papyri has allowed scholars to reconstruct the daily rituals, seasonal festivals, and theological concepts that characterized Ra's worship, while demonstrating the central role that solar religion played in every aspect of Egyptian life, from royal politics to personal spirituality. The influence of Egyptian solar symbolism on modern spiritual movements has been particularly significant, as contemporary seekers have found in Ram's mythology and iconography powerful tools for understanding cosmic processes and developing personal relationships with divine forces. New Age movements, neo-pagan traditions, and various forms of contemporary mysticism have adapted Egyptian solar practices for modern use, while creating new interpretations of ancient symbols that address contemporary spiritual needs and cultural contexts. The psychological insights embedded in Ra's mythology have attracted the attention of modern psychologists and therapists who have found in the sun god's daily journey through light and darkness powerful metaphors for understanding human psychological development and the process of individuation that characterizes healthy personality growth. The archetypal patterns represented by Ra's various forms and his relationships with other deities have provided valuable frameworks for understanding the universal human experiences of birth, growth, conflict, death, and renewal that define the human condition across all cultures and historical periods. The artistic influence of Egyptian solar art continues to inspire contemporary artists, architects, and designers who find in ancient Egyptian aesthetics powerful models for creating works that combine beauty with spiritual significance, while addressing contemporary concerns about environmental sustainability, social justice, and cultural identity. The geometric patterns, symbolic imagery, and monumental scale that characterized Egyptian solar art have been adapted for modern contexts while maintaining their essential character as expressions of cosmic order and divine harmony. The scientific legacy of Egyptian solar observations has contributed to the development of modern astronomy mathematics and calendar systems that continue to govern contemporary life, while providing the foundation for space exploration and cosmic research that extends human understanding far beyond the boundaries of our solar system. The precise astronomical knowledge that Egyptian priests developed through their careful observation of Ra's movements has proven remarkably accurate and continues to inform modern scientific understanding of solar and planetary cycles. The educational impact of Ra's legacy extends through museums, universities, and cultural institutions worldwide that preserve and interpret Egyptian solar art and literature for contemporary audiences, while fostering cross-cultural understanding and appreciation for the achievements of ancient civilizations. These educational efforts have created global communities of scholars, students, and enthusiasts who continue to explore the meanings and implications of Egyptian solar religion, while developing new applications for ancient wisdom in contemporary contexts. The environmental movement has found particular inspiration in Ra's mythology, as the sun god's role as the source of all life and the maintainer of cosmic balance provides powerful symbols for understanding humanity, its relationship with the natural world, and the urgent need to protect the environmental systems that sustain life on Earth. The ancient Egyptian understanding of the sun as both a life-giving and potentially destructive force offers valuable insights for addressing contemporary challenges related to climate change, renewable energy, and sustainable development. The enduring fascination with Ra and ancient Egyptian culture continues to generate new discoveries, interpretations, and applications that demonstrate the inexhaustible richness of the legacy that Egyptian civilization created during its long devotion to the sun god, ensuring that Ra's influence will continue to inspire and inform human understanding for generations to come, while providing eternal testimony to the power of human creativity and spiritual aspiration in the face of cosmic mystery and divine transcendence.